Maha and misinformation. We're talking about what will it really take to make America healthy again. And I've got two great guests, Tara Vander Dussen and Natalie Kovarik of Discover Ag, in this episode of The Business of Agriculture. Are you looking for productive efficiencies in growing higher yielding, better performing crops? New Fields Ag provides a complete portfolio of biological products focused on you, the farmer. Visit newfieldsag.com for more information to help you farm better. Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of The Business of Agriculture. Got a great one for you today. I've got Tara Vander Dussen and Natalie Kovarik with Discover Ag, and they are awesome. They are both farm ladies. They are farm operators, one in Nebraska, one in New Mexico. They've been on this show before, and I've been on theirs, and we're talking about the reality of making America healthy again. Okay, lots and lots of stuff going on in the last 6 months. We're recording this spring of 2025. RFK Jr. has been all over the place, still pushing his agenda for a healthier America via his post in the Health and Human Services. A bit more blowback, a bit more negativity. The media that was fawning over RFK Jr. a year ago, not so much right now, but there are some things happening. Food dyes are being banned, and actually voluntarily food companies have agreed they're going to remove chemical-based or even petroleum-based synthetic food dyes. There is a push about making America healthy again, and we're talking about changing the dietary guidelines for America that have been in place, revamped every 5 years since 1980. Big stuff going on. And I brought these ladies on to say, you know what, what's it really going to take to America healthy again? And what do you see happening here? So we'll lead off with my friend, Ms. Tara Vander Dussen, fellow dairy person that she is. What are you seeing?
Yeah, thanks for having us on. I'm excited to chat about this. You know, there is like a lot happening right now. We were talking, you know, before we jumped on to the mics about it being kind of an exciting time, that it seems like all these things we've kind of been talking about for a year plus, like leading up to the election and what RFK was like running on, it's all like coming to a head. We're seeing what his actual, you know, actions are in office or as secretary. And then kind of like what you said, what is like how are people reacting? And Natalie and I are kind of seeing a shift online of how people are reacting to this whole, you know, Maha group and RFK.
Natalie, I think that obviously you guys are very active and feel the pulse, if you will, via social media, et cetera, which is the new forum and new platform. The hardcore push, you know, the environmental working group and those sorts of followers are getting a bit of blowback. But in general, I would say that there is still a sentiment among our consumers, and obviously ag is a consumer business. I point this out all the time. Sometimes our friends in ag forget this, but we answer to a consumer. Without a buying customer, there is no need for us. There's still a thing that says, well, I don't know what's wrong with removing chemicals. What's wrong with not having poison in my kid's cereal? What's wrong with not having a bunch of petroleum-based food dyes that make my kids all, excited to buy it, and it's crappy food? I still see a sentiment among our consumers that says, I don't know, man. I don't have a problem with RFK Jr.'s doing.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that there is still major supporters of the Maha movement and major supporters of, you know, what RFK Jr. is going to be rolling out when it comes to ridding the system of, you know, quote unquote chemicals and dyes and all the preservatives and fillatives, like the key words that they love to latch on. And I think you'll always have those diehards. I think you're just starting to see maybe a group that originally aligned with RFK Jr. kind of segment themselves out a little bit, whether it was getting too carried away, whether they're starting to do some of the research and hear conversations about the realities of what this actually looks like. And so I think maybe there's some subdivision that happened between maybe a core group that started like wanting to see a change in the food system, but now maybe disagreeing on like what those changes are or how we go about those changes.
It's a little bit like they can get on board with some stuff. RFK Jr. background, environmental attorney, as he says, which really is environmental activist with a law degree and used the court system a lot of times to enrich himself, but also make changes, he would say. The problem is sometimes they go a little far, right? Like I can get on with, I don't want petroleum-based food dyes in my kid's stuff, but wait a minute, you also don't want my kid to get a measles vaccine? There gets that thing where some people jump out of the canoe because it's like, well, I was with this guy up to here. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
Well, it's not even, there is definitely, I think, a group getting into like the healthcare pharmaceutical side of it that are starting to like maybe digress and want to pull themselves away a little bit from some of the messaging or from the, you know, the main movement itself. But I think even just sticking within the food system, you're seeing people separate. And because I think it's overwhelming, like you start out with this positive notion that yes, you want to feed your family the healthiest food and feed yourself the healthiest food and make the healthiest choices, whether that's for the land, the environment, the animals, etc. Like there's the laundry list of the bullet points that people want to do good by when they're shopping for their food. But you move beyond that. You start taking actions or steps of what it's required for yourself as that mother. I think that's scrolling social media or voting on, removing the food dye or paying more for the organic strawberry that all the influencers are touting you need to do. And that's when they get a little bit of the pause for a moment and they say, this isn't what I originally thought it was, or this is too much. You asked me to do this. You're asking me to do this. You're asking me to do this. And now I feel like I don't even know where I can shop. You're telling me Trader Joe's is bad. You're telling me Whole Foods is bad. Now, where am I left? I don't have a farmer's market. And there's just this overwhelm where they almost pause and are like, I can't do all of that. I want a healthier food, but what you're asking me to do has gone too far beyond what I can capably do as a mother working, et cetera, whatever, their situation is.
Tara, the overwhelmed consumer, and that's the tough part about causes. I've been pointing out forever, I wrote about it in one of my books, that causes have become religion, right? We're a less devoutly religious country, or shall I say, traditionally religious country than we were back, when I was born in 1969. 3% of Americans would have said, I'm not religious. Now it's about 30% would say, I'm not religious, although there's some shifting going on there. And I've always pointed out, food sort of becomes the new religion. Causes, climate change, or whatever the thing is, becomes the new religion. And the thing is, to be devoutly religious takes energy and time. And to Natalie's point, that's the tough part. If you're an RFK follower, or if you really are getting on board, whether it's him or not, maybe he started a conversation and you decided to join the religion. It's hard to be. It takes energy and time to stay religious about it. You think there's going to be? Is there a lastingness to this? I'm not sure lastingness is a word.
It is now.
Is there a lastingness to the religion of I want cleaner food, I want no dyes, I want organic? Is there what's this look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this group is targeting, as Natalie said, moms, working women is where a lot of the majority of this conversation, I feel like, is being geared towards. So you're talking to a group of people who is already stretched probably too thin and does not have enough time to go around. And here they are, they want to make better choices for their kids, as we've already said. But now you're putting all of these limits and requirements, and you're scaring them. I mean, you see, we've been covering a lot of influencers that have been in, the produce aisle, telling people don't eat this type of produce. And you're like, we already in America don't eat enough produce. Now you're making even more requirements for these moms, when the goal started out, make America healthy again. How on earth is scaring people about fruits and vegetables going to make them healthy again, is something that I kind of keep asking myself. And so I do think that we're pushing the limits too far. We did a whole reel on an influencer that was saying Trader Joe's is bad. And the comment section of that was fascinating, because so many moms and women were like, but that's where I go. That's where I can find produce that is affordable, and I can find foods that are semi-healthy but are also pretty convenient. And so it just kept, I feel like, again, to the point of Natalie thinking, we're taking these people, but a lot of times the women, too far, and they're pushing back a little bit, or asking more questions, or becoming overly fearful of their food when they don't need to be.
I do think, though, Damian, there is to use your new word, there is a small portion of this conversation, this movement, that is lasting.
Yes.
I think that the MAHA movement has kind of, if you think of a barometer, they've kind of gone back and forth, and they haven't landed yet in the area that we do want. There is a nationwide movement and nationwide consensus, I think, of wanting a healthier food system and wanting a healthier, community, right? Population. And so I think we haven't landed on the barometer between goals and reality. But I think when we land there, there is something lasting, and I think it'll be better. Hopefully it will be better for consumers. Hopefully it will be better for farmers, and it will be better for the, people shopping in the grocery store.
So
the only thing Sorry, I'll add one more point to that on the lasting, because the only thing I think I worry about on the lasting part of it is I think about when you do a restrictive diet and then people end up over binging. And I'm like, I hope, as to Natalie's point, that we end up somewhere. I think we're still finding that happy medium of moving it forward and not people getting just burnt out.
The thing is, in an affluent country such as ours, food consumption is a fad. I mean, for many people, probably not for the 3 people on this call. I still have my whole chocolate milk in the morning, just like I did in 1974. I mean, I don't follow the fad as much, but for many people, it's the Miami Beach diet, it's the grapefruit thing, it's the low carb, it's the Atkins, it's the God only knows what. So on that front, we posed the question: what's it really going to take to make America healthy again? I want to run through some stuff. Some stats that are real. And honest to goodness, it takes an RFK. It does take some activism because he's not anti-ag. I mean, he's really not anti-ag. He's
Totally.
anti-glyphosate. He's anti-food dyes, etc. And is his heart in the right place? I don't know. Maybe. But and obviously, as an activist attorney, it was really about, he says, about saving the world from, chemistry and all that. But he made a lot of money suing companies like Monsanto. But I want to run through some of the stats that he points out that you'd have a really hard time arguing. If you are Joe or Jane consumer in Paradise Valley, Arizona, or Schaumburg, Illinois, or name the suburban that watches this and says, holy hell, this guy has a point. I want to run through some of those points. Before I do that, I want to remind you about my friends that make this show possible. Newfields Ag, I'm wearing a shirt right here. I got their hat back here in the background. I'm not afraid to whore out. You know that about me. Also, I want to talk to you about Harvest Returns. Harvest Returns wants to remind you that if you're an agricultural company, you need every cutting edge that you can to get today in all aspects of your business, including finance. Agriculture is a globalized business, and you are competing not just with the producers of the next county or the state, but with the farms around the world. So why are you still getting financing the same way you always have? You just call your lender. And I love those people. Community banks been customers of mine. Farm credit system been a customer of mine. But you know what? What if you have something that doesn't fit their model? You need financing. The people at Harvest Returns can help you. They have revolutionized the way farms, ranches, and agribusinesses fund their operations. They provide flexible terms that help you manage your cash flows and safely grow your operation. I just was on a webinar with them yesterday. It was a small meat processing company, regional meat processing company, with a completely different business model. They weren't going to get funding from your traditional lender. You know what? Harvest Returns has a pool of investors with money to help your agribusiness grow. Go to harvestreturns.com, harvestreturns.com, to learn more about how you can get started with growing your operation and expanding today. 10,000 food. I want to run through this. 10,000 food ingredients versus 400. These are the bullet points on the Dr. Phil interview with RFK Jr. 400 food ingredients in Europe versus 10,000 here. Now, he throws those numbers out. I don't know if he's... What ingredients? I think he's talking about additives. 74% of teens in the United States of America would not be eligible for military service because they can't do a pull-up or a push-up or run, a quarter of a mile. The chemical food bans that he has pushed through were only 8, and there's a couple more where we're going to get rid of petroleum-based food dyes versus vegetable food dyes, which was allowed in Europe. They love to compare it to Europe. I'm just running through some of these things. Then he went on the thing here. He's not wrong. We're fairly unhealthy. 74% of teens can't do a pull-up or a push-up and would not be eligible to join the Army. It's almost a national security issue. We're so unhealthy.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I said I think there is a lasting component, because there is truth of seeds in what he's saying that I think general people, like you said, whether they fall full on the Maha spectrum or they're just the general Jane consumer, are starting to realize and accept. I think what is important to, answer the question of what we're talking about, like what will actually take to make America healthy again, it's figuring out what consumers actually care about. And I think that's what's going on right now in the 2025 landscape. Like, you said, RFK Jr. was a great leader to make this movement happen. And I agree. I think someone like him needed to come in, point out some of these statistics, shake things up, use a very large platform running for presidency to talk about food and health in a way that a presidency hasn't focused on before. But is his answers the right ones? My belief is no. And I feel like he started the original snowball down the hill. And what 2025 will be is sorting through that. What do consumers actually care about? What can we actually put into policy to change for farmers? And how do we actually make those match to an end result, make a healthier America?
Dara, one thing I would say that is a good thing is that it wasn't that long ago, low fat, vegetable. And the 3 people on here, me being a dairy farm kid and a lover of meat, Tara, you being a dairy producer in New Mexico, Natalie, a beef rancher in Nebraska, we're all about the animal protein and we never were off of it. That's a good thing, because now we've got consumers that not only are saying, oh, yeah, meat's okay, I don't have to be vegan. And we already know the fake meat thing was losing interest organically. It was losing interest because nobody wanted the crap. Less of this soybean oil and more beef stuff. Is that where the future is going?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy to watch as we are talking. RFK was at a Shake Shack, I think, talking about putting beef tallow back into French fries. We have the fat of beef tallow as skincare. We're seeing, like butter consumption, cheese consumption at like all-time highs. It's an exciting time to be in animal agriculture, seeing these movements. Do I think like all seed oils are killing us? I don't think I fall in that camp, right? Like, I think there is probably some happy mediums there. I do think, on the food dyes thing is a great example. Do I think that removing food dyes from Doritos makes Doritos suddenly healthy? No, right? Like, does removing seed oils from an ultra processed food suddenly make that ultra processed food healthy? No, like, getting fries at Shake Shack that have been deep fried in beef tallow versus seed oils, it's not suddenly a health food, probably, right? Like, I think again, it's like a bigger conversation. I think we're focusing in on like micro things on some cases with this movement, and it needs to be like a bigger conversation of like the macro pieces of what's going into our diet, how people are consuming food, what they're getting. Like, that is probably the piece I think that's kind of like missing.
Which has been interesting to watch unfold, because I think this is where Maha kind of went wrong a little bit. They used influencer campaigns and major influencers in a lot of their original, movement communication. And one thing we know true about online, Damian, is that anything that is evokes negative emotions, reactions, anything you can latch onto and make your platform, right? Like, you could latch onto the whole movement we saw with like Kellogg's getting rid of dyes in the cereal. Right. That is something an influencer can absolutely latch on. They can make their content about it, and they can, excel. They can grow. Watch some of these Maha influencers grow hundreds of thousands of followers through these different campaigns. And it's also going back to what you talked about, the religion. It becomes their identity. And to Tara's point, I feel like that's one point where they've gone wrong, is they have microed in on some of these things, because at the end of the day, they're content creators or influencers that are using, these talking points for content, and losing sight of like where the actual end of day result to make a meaningful change is.
I don't think anybody in ag has a problem with removing food dyes. I mean, I've heard it said, you're the beef person here, Natalie, that the groceries, the retailers, put dye in meat, ground meat, to make it have a more vibrant red, right? I remember hearing that. Is that true, by the way? I think it is, right?
I don't actually know.
I remember.
I mean, I'd be afraid to put out a blanket statement, yes or no. Any meat I have bought or like been at our local butcher or anything, I have never seen that, but I'm sure someone could scoop something up from whatever year where they did, and
I remember hearing that. So I'm not sure that again, a lot of people don't care about the food dye. I think that that the good news is it's not been. We haven't heard the negativity toward animal agriculture or even generally agriculture. Most of the criticism has been either about chemical use. That's the only thing that's affecting us. The rest of it's downstream. It's the processors. In particular, I brought another prop in, processed food, like the Nutty Bar, which, by the way, I haven't eaten one of these since the 80s, but Mrs. Mason keeps them around. She says for when the nieces and nephews come over. The nieces and nephews are like 27 years old now. It's really not for them. It might be for Mrs. Mason. But anyway, I think processed food has absolutely got the bullseye on it. And you can argue that what it would really take to make America healthy again, center aisle, and also quantity. It's not just, I had a Nutty Bar when I was a little kid. You had stuff like this when you were a kid. I don't think you had 40 of them. And I think that there's the quantity effect. Am I right onto this? Is it not an issue of having a Nutty Bar? It's having 50 of them. Is that where the problems come in?
Yeah, I think this is something Natalie and I actually talk a lot about in our own lives with our own kids, that like, I'm not that worried about food dyes in my food because I know how little of it my kids are getting. Does that mean I'm okay with it? No. Like, I'm honestly kind of the board, like, why do we have it? Why are we adding food dyes to things? Like, why do pickles have green dye in them to make them greener? Like, I think there's a point to it, but at the same time, it's not something I'm overly worried about, because looking at my kids' diet, they're not getting a bag of Skittles every day, like, so I do think there's like But again, like that goes to the bigger conversation of looking at the entire diet versus picking out these singular foods. And so, yeah, to your point, yeah, my kids aren't eating 40 Nutter Butters. So I'm not that worried if they grab a Nutter Butter from, you know, the aunt and uncle or the grandmother who has it in her pantry. But then again, like if it was in our diets every day, would I be more concerned about it?
This is something, though, I think the MAHA movement has done well for agriculture that I think is like a good thing for us, is it has actually sanctioned farmers and ranchers out from manufacturers and food and made consumers, instead of lumping all of us into one, which I feel like 10 years ago, 7 years ago, 5 years ago, you heard big ag a lot, but you heard big ag in relation to farmers and ranchers. And now you hear big ag in relation to Bayer. And they have kind of, the consumer has made sense that what the potato farmer does is not what the potato chip is. It's Lay's. It's that process afterward. And I think that's been a really positive thing for MAHA to get those kind of siloed portions of the food system.
We have big food.
It's good for the producer.
Big ag.
It's good for the producer. And I agree with that it's mostly been, the criticism has been downstream. Kellogg's, not Tara and Natalie. I get that. The thing is, we don't have a business if we don't have the processor, and we don't have a business, we don't have the input. So I get it that it's siloed it to the consumer that I'm talking about in Schaumburg, Illinois, in the suburbs of Chicago, but we are all in the same industry.
Well, I agree and I disagree, because I think that's the interesting thing about all of this is to watch this unfold. Do we have a business without Kellogg's taking, transforming whatever wheat into cereal? We still do, right? We still need food. And I know you get that and stuff, but I think it's interesting to watch where people fall and how strongly we're attached to processed food, or how willing we are to move back to maybe a diet that is healthier. And I think that's like the big interesting question right now is like, do we need to process food as much as we do to have our food system? Is that where we are with nationwide and preferences from consumers? Or is there wiggle room to get rid of some of this processing and still have a robust food system that benefits farmers in the way it does?
I want to point out, and Tara, I want to get your comments on this because, again, using RFK as the example, he's obviously very effective as a communicator because of his, he's well educated. He's Kennedy, and then he also a trial lawyer. And he makes the point, and I know I'm a few years older than you, and he talks about tobacco. And when I was a kid, I smoked cigarettes and chewed tobacco and did all that. And they just talk about how tobacco companies really were gearing their marketing efforts to children to get them addicted and hooked early. I never thought of that when I was 10 years old, smoking a Winston with the kid down the road, but I guess maybe there's some truth to that. But anyway, he then
I love this throwback to little Damian.
Yeah, right. I was walking around smoking cigarettes when I was 10. But anyway, here's the thing. He has a valid point here. He says there became this whole movement against tobacco by the 80s. And then 1995 was the settlement where the tobacco companies were forced to give like almost $100 billion, I think, was the number, toward states. States all sued the tobacco companies. It was a big, huge money grab, et cetera. The tobacco companies saw that coming and had boatloads of cash, so they diversified into food. So like when I was graduating from Purdue, Kraft Heinz, I think that's about the time that Philip Morris, the tobacco company that makes Marlboro, the world's most popular cigarette, bought Kraft and then became Kraft Heinz, Philip Morris Kraft. That all happened in the early 90s before the lawsuit because they saw it coming. And RFK has a point here. He says, so think about it. The companies that were amazing at making huge amounts of money by getting folks addicted to something then went to a different area. And I think there's some validity to that and about the sugar, because sugar, which is his new crusade, is about how sugar is poison. There's something to this. I mean, the guy says this and I'm like, oh, yeah, right. When RJR Reynolds became a huge food company, when Kraft Heinz became part of Philip Morris, the Marlboro company, there's some validity to this, really.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's definitely they knew they had a business model and they moved on to a new business format, right? A new product essentially. And they moved on to ultra processed foods. I do think it's interesting. I think there's two sides of this. There is the consumer responsibility, and I'll start with that. And then maybe I'll go to the other side. For me, the consumer responsibility, if you don't want food dyes, there are options on the shelf that do not contain food dyes, for example, right? We know this. And yet consumers traditionally pick the food dyes. There was even a conversation where Fruit Loops removed the food dyes and people were were upset that Fruit Loops looked boring, and then Fruit Loops put it back in. Like, people were asking for that. The flip side of that coin is how much is maybe like out of our control, like how addicted have we become, how influenced are we by their marketing efforts and their tactics, just like, 10-year-old you were smoking a cigarette. Like, how much of that is like subconscious that we are being like influenced to make these decisions, and then with the sugar component, essentially becoming like addicted to these foods. And so I think it's a both and in my mind. Like, I do think there needs to be more conversation around how they are targeting these foods. You think about the end caps. They're not putting bananas on the end caps for, at kids' eye levels, right? Like, they're putting the ultra processed, brightly colored foods. There was there was a Netflix documentary that was like kind of a satire about like the cereal industry and about the cartoons that, obviously they have a cartoon character because they're gearing all of this towards kids. And then at the same time, I think there again is consumer responsibility of like, what are we deciding? Companies they want to make money. They're going to give us what we want. And if we're picking the Fruit Loops with the extra dye, obviously that's going to push them towards that direction in creating future products.
Your partner, we're going to toss to her, who has a real problem with the cereal. She hates cereal anyhow. I just know this. She saw a video a couple years ago when it was alleged that eating Lucky Charms was healthier for you than having a half a pound burger. She's hated the cereal companies forever. I just want to tell you, when I was a kid, I was not only smoking cigarettes, I was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I was Tony the Tiger, Fruit Loops. No, not Fruit Loops.
Lucky Charms.
Dig 'em, Sugar Smacks, all that stuff. Super Sugar Crisp. You're right, by the way. They all had a cartoon character that was their mascot. It was amazing. And there was probably more nutrition if you ate the cardboard box than what was in the actual bag.
Yeah, this is actually a conversation we had on the podcast that I feel like was kind of the initial, at least when Tara and I, or when I personally became aware of this like new food conversation we're entering into. And I don't know if you remember this, but on X, there was a X war, even though it's more fun to say Twitter war, between Callie Means and Jason Kelsey. And he was upset that the Kelsey brothers, for anyone not tuning in, very famous football players, were working with the cereal industry to create their own Kelsey Brothers cereal. And it was basically like all the 5, sugariest cereals you could get on the grocery store aisle poured into one box. And he was really upset, saying that they shouldn't, being, in the position they are in, child's perception of childhood, they shouldn't be promoting something like this. And so I do think there's this interesting conversation, Tara kind of already alluded to it, of the marketing they do, and the problem it lends to the health problems we're having in America.
I want to get into the sugar part of it because I've got some stats on that are actually pretty eye-opening, and we wouldn't know them if it weren't for the MAHA movement. Frankly, I wouldn't have known. And I want to get into that. Before I do, I want to remind you about another company that makes this show possible, and it's our friends over at Redox. With a new growing season underway, the superior nutrition from my friends at Redox Bionutrients will make a major difference come harvest time. That's right. Redox started off in specialty crop. Darren Moon, the founder of this company, 31 years ago began this. He then moved into turf and now increasingly into broadacre agriculture, places like right here in the Midwest where I'm talking to you from today. Redox provides carefully sourced nutrients that are combined with biostimulants that have been proven winners since the Moon family started the company 31 years ago. Why don't you look up Redox? They have a product called DiCap. It provides unequaled stress defense. That's right, increasing plant respiration and antioxidant production. It's also a fantastic source of potassium and phosphorus. In times like this, when we're talking about break-even commodity prices, what if you can cut back on some of your traditional synthetic inputs and switch over to something like Redox, save a little bit of money, and not sacrifice yield? Go to redoxgrows.com and learn more about DiCap. That's redoxgrows.com. Sugar. If I was going to say make America healthy again, I would look right back to the fact of I lived through the low-fat thing, 1970s. Folks that decided they were going to be healthy. There was never a thing called skim milk until like the early 70s, and that's when it started ballooning and taking off. Low-fat food. It would be a thing by the 70s and 80s. You'd go in, and it was low-fat everything. Low-fat sour cream, which is crazy because sour cream is supposed to be fat. So that's this whole thing. But what did food companies do? The same companies that now are owned by tobacco companies, they threw in sugar as a replacement because if it ain't got no fat, it ain't got no flavor. So what do? We juice it up by adding more sugar. Our sugar consumption really arose with the movement against fat, which arose really 1950s, the whole 7 studies or 7 countries and all that. And I'd say the fat as evil was replaced with sugar, and you can trace all that right back to about the 60s, 70s, and then by the time it became entrenched, look at the obesity epidemic. 1970s, 6 or 10% of America was obese. Now it's 42%. I say it's the sugar.
Yeah, it is. Obviously, as a dairy farmer, this is something that is very just something I focus a lot of my time on because it's fascinating to watch. And one of the things is you're talking about the 60s, 70s, 80s, and we're still dealing with the repercussions in 2025, looking at school lunches, that we cannot serve whole milk in our school lunches. And it's just kind of wild because they are mad about the fat content, right? And yet, there's all this research that even when kids that drink, say, chocolate milk, where there is slight sugar added, although it's fascinating, kids will prefer the taste of whole fat chocolate milk with less sugar than the overly sugared one. But
I'm one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's just this whole conversation that you can actually put less sugar if you have more fat and keep the whole mouth feel. It's a whole science. But there's research that kids that drink chocolate milk are less likely to drink soda pop and all of these things. And yet we have these restrictions in, school lunches where so many of our kids are getting so many of their calories that they can't have whole fat. It's kind of insane.
Do you think that Natalie gives her kids whole chocolate milk? Because I bet she doesn't, but she doesn't tell you that she doesn't because she.
No, she tells me. So when we first started our friendship, she served 2%, and we had to. I know. Damian, listen.
I don't even know. I don't even know if I want to hear. I don't even know if I want to hear from a woman that gives her kids 2% milk.
Listen, anytime we're talking about dairy, I just let the New Mexico milkmaid handle the entire conversation. So you don't have to worry about me piping in at all. Not me and my 2% over here, although I have gone to whole milk now.
You want to make America healthy again? Is the first step reduction of sugar, Natalie?
Yeah, I think it'd be a good place to start. And I think that that's actually one that would have a meaningful a meaningful result. We've mentioned a couple of times now that they seem to be focusing on food dyes. I think they did that on purpose. It's an easy win. It's an easy thing listen, you've heard Tara and I say before, sure, whatever, take them out. We don't care. I mean, because there is no nutritional value. So it's an easy starting point. It's an easy win. But we've said again, multiple times, that doesn't really do anything for the health of America. If they wanted to and cared about actually, some of these influencers having tangible results to our health, absolutely. I think sugar would be a thing we could look at across society. Where are we putting it? Where are we adding it? How much are we consuming it? That's why you're starting to see the SNAP conversation come into play. What are we allowing people to spend their money on that is healthy versus not healthy? And we know sugar is not healthy.
Well, I never got these as a kid because we were not well off and had 9 children in the family. And my dad worked nights as a railroad clerk, and mom and a couple of us kids did all the milking. Got pop only about once every 3 months. Now I have 3 of these a day. And you know what? I don't want to mess with this. If they mess with Coke like was done in 1985, it's really going to piss me off. All right.
I said the same thing about Diet Coke. I was like, don't you come for my Diet Coke. Do whatever you want to the food system, but let me have my Diet Coke.
But that's what's so interesting because, Damian, you'll have these people get in the MAHA movement at the beginning. They're like, yes, let's get healthy. And then when it comes down to something they care about, they're like, no, but don't touch my pop. And so that's where you're seeing this divergent and this absolutely kind of chaos of 2025 landscape because you're having people that are saying, touch their stuff, touch what I don't care about, not what I do care about.
Okay, what will it really take to make America healthy again? First off, sugar, like you said, food dye is an easy win. First off, if you're a trial lawyer, what do? Pick up a few easy wins, and then you tell the next jury that the precedent is set. So it's absolutely right out of the playbook. You know what? Of course, Bayer is evil and glyphosate is evil because look at what the jury in San Francisco said. Well, of course, they were programmed to believe that anyway. So yeah, food dyes, easy win. And then also not just food dyes, poisonous food dyes derived from petroleum. So all of a sudden it becomes the wording. What are trial lawyers and certain politicians very good at doing? The characterization, which has happened to us. Factory farm, industrial agriculture, GMOs, all those kinds of things. On the sugar front, which I think is the next battle, and this is going to be a big one, Dr. Phil pulled numbers out. Check them if you will. I didn't. I'm just going to give you Dr. Phil's numbers. He said that Americans ate 18 pounds of sugar per year in the year 1800. We were barely a country, let's face it. Sugar back then would have been molasses derived or something. By 1900, we had 5 times that. We were up to 90 pounds of sugar per American consumed in the year 1900. Growing country, industrial revolution, eating a little bit better. Fast forward 109 years later to the year 2009, we doubled from 90 pounds to 180 pounds of sugar consumption per American. Those are Dr. Phil's numbers. Look them up if you will. And I assume that accounts for all sugars, meaning the sucrose and then the high fructose corn syrup, et cetera, et cetera. you'd have a hard time saying, oh, half a pound of sugar consumed per American per day is a good thing. I think sugar's absolutely got the bullseye on it, and maybe it should have.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are staggering. I feel like I don't need to double check Dr. Phil's numbers to know like our sugar has increased exponentially, right? Like I think we probably all know that on some level. And so it's interesting to look at when those changes started. I think you talked about this, that like when the obesity, like it's crazy to me that in the 80s, we were blaming something, a food like meat and milk that we had been consuming for hundreds, if not thousands of years on like it goes to the conversation like we're blaming ancestral foods for modern day illnesses, and it's like what has actually changed. And so not to go after all the sugar farmers, sorry guys, but like I do, as Natalie said, I think if there's a place that had a meaningful impact, looking at our sugar intake would probably be one of them.
I'm waiting on Natalie. She usually always chimes in after you. By the way,
I do usually.
I'm wondering also, I don't even have to ask her the question because she's got a lot to say. I almost wonder though, like out of the two of you, the meaner one is the one from Nebraska. Like if I feel like there was anyone that was going to take sugar, like take my pop away from me, I don't think Tara would. I think Tara
No, Natalie would. Natalie doesn't have pop. She doesn't have caffeine. She's probably going to come for people's coffee.
Because,
like, I mean, Natalie's coming for it all.
You know what? If you're watching this on my YouTube channel, I hope you are. If you're listening to it, do go and subscribe to the Damian Mason YouTube channel. I just started putting promotion behind that here this winter. So I'd really like to, you know why Tara wouldn't take my Coke away from you? Because watch this. She is, as my Coke can says, my friend, Natalie. Probably
Poor
not so
Natalie.
much.
We're coming for Natalie today.
It's okay. I can handle it. I only drink water, and I support the Florida orange juice industry by buying orange juice. They're struggling down there. So, we got to help them out.
I think our consumption of OJ, speaking of dietary changes, and I wrote about this in my book, it had plummeted. I mean, it was 4 ounces per American per week back like in the 40s. And then they came up with that brilliant campaign. It's not just for breakfast anymore. In the 1970s, you're too young to remember, you'd be watching evening TV, like The Rockford Files in 1975 is on and you're watching it. And a Florida orange juice commercial come on and say it's not just for breakfast anymore. So all of a sudden Americans are like, oh, hell, I can drink orange juice outside of breakfast. And then even better, I'll throw some vodka in there. They went way, way up in consumption by the 80s and 90s and then have just fallen to where we're back almost to, I think, about the 1950s, 60s levels of orange juice consumption. So some dietary changes aren't health based at all, or even movement based. Sometimes they're inexplicable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're facing a lot down there with like greening. I think they're down 90%, and part of it is supply and part of it is demand. But to your point, I actually think one of the fun things I think about all of this, like the food conversations, is the marketing and how much that can change for better or for worse when it comes to our food system.
We said we're going to talk about what it takes to make America healthy again. I think movement is another thing. Our joking aside, I'm going to pull another little prop out here. I just had this on my shelf. We can joke about me having a Marlboro Light or a Camel Light when I was in 4th or 5th or 6th grade. Honest to goodness, I think that this thing I'm holding in my hand right now, this smartphone, might be more addictive and more burdensome or negative for a child's health than having a Marlboro Light. Oh my God, Damon, I can't believe you just said that. Children are handed these in America as pacifiers. And so all of a sudden, you've got 10-year-old kids that I commonly see children that I have a bad leg after my hip replacement surgery, and I think I could outrun that 10-year-old kid. That's sad. So I think the first thing really is the movement. We've come a long way from the president's physical fitness that was begun in the 1960s. Sugar and movement. And there's something there because we've got a really big problem. To use another one of their numbers, they use the number of 38% of children that aren't even teenagers are diabetic or pre-diabetic. I think we got to really consider that there's a problem there. It's sugar, and it's also obesity. It's also sedentary lifestyle.
Yeah, I think you cannot have these conversations in a silo either, is something I look at and Natalie and I have talked about. Like, for example, we're going to keep picking on food dyes. I see so many conversations with parents that are like, yeah, we took out food dyes and my kid suddenly was not having ADHD anymore and all these things. And then you start talking to them and it wasn't just that one change. It was a lifestyle change that the whole family went into. And so to your point, I do think we cannot just pick on just sugar. We cannot pick on just food dyes. We can't pick on just fat in milk, right? Like it's our lifestyle that we're not moving. It's getting outdoors. Like how few hours do kids spend outdoors now compared to previously? I think like talking about the sunlight and the benefits of that, like all of the things that go into that. It's not, none of these things are happening in a vacuum or by themselves. It is all of these things that we have suddenly changed in our lifestyles from sugar, from fat, from limiting sunlight, from limiting movement. All of these things are playing into what is happening, I think, with our youth and then leading into adulthood as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're a sedentary 12-year-old that's 60 pounds overweight because you sit around and play games on this all the time and you have a poor diet, the odds don't get better. You don't all of a sudden then get healthy and change your lifestyle by 20. You usually, unfortunately, what's set in by the age 12 a lot of times stays, and that's very, very tragic because those people are kind of set up for a life sentence of really unhealth.
Yeah, and it's not just lack of movement when it comes to technology. I mean, there's a lot of concerns I have about technology, and I think a lot of concerns the nation is starting to have about technology and the effects on children. I feel like I can speak to this like kind of a little bit personally, because I think there's a whole generation just a little bit above me. I was obviously a younger mom, but I parented. My oldest son is a freshman in college, so I feel like we were kind of the first generation to parent that was the first generation to not have technology growing up. I didn't get a cell phone until my senior year in high school, right? And so this generation above me, they were probably in college, right, when they got their first cell phone. But we were that first parent group to parent children with technology. And I think we really messed up. And not because we like obviously intentionally wanted to, but as a society across the whole, we allowed a lot of things with technology that we were like, oh, this is really great. There's a lot of advancement. This is going to do a lot of good without recognizing all of the harm that would come with it. I mean, my child's school, he was able to have a phone throughout the entire high school. It was not checked in. He could take it into class. He could be on his phone whenever he wanted during class. Talk about like attention deficit disorders and what that does. And now you're starting to see our generations come out of that where you're seeing schools give like no phone rules now. They're mandating that you have to check them in, or they're putting some of these policies into place. And I don't know, that generation, there's a lot with technology beyond just lack of movement that I think is to the greater conversation of, making America healthy again with anxiety and depression and a lot of mental health that is wreaking havoc for sure.
By the way, mental health and physical health walk down the same aisle together. They're
absolutely
linked. And so if you are depressed and you spend all your time on your phone, and by the way, the companies that put these apps together are just as good at getting you addicted. TikTok is good at getting you addicted as Philip Morris ever was. Trust me, as a kid that smoked cigarettes at age 10 and doesn't smoke at all today because I'm not addicted, I can see people that are really going to have a hard time shaking the addiction of online porn or TikTok videos or whatever that thing is. So addiction's addiction, right? And then mental health, physical health do walk down the same aisle together. There's companies that want you to have a problem, though, and this is going to sound like I'm picking on Tara or Natalie again, Tara. My friend Tara. I want to talk about Big Pharma. Big Pharma doesn't profit on healthy patients. Big Pharma doesn't. And one of us on this call has a background in pharmacy. And so not with Big Pharma companies, but according to this interview also with Dr. Phil, 75% of ad revenue on evening news is from pharmaceutical companies. Anybody that's ever watched the evening news, which is really not news, and also it's for older people, is pharmaceutical companies, right? If you have 22 advertising slots and a 30-minute news broadcast in the evening, 17 of them are pharmaceutical companies. You talk about making America healthy again, there's forces that would really like you to be just where you are and need their product. That's a problem.
Yeah, I think I'll take this one because of.
Oh, good, because I was not about
my history. I am I got my doctorate of pharmacy. I don't practice full time anymore, but I do still actually fill in at two of our local pharmacies in my small town. So I'm still a practicing pharmacist.
By the way, she's in Western Nebraska. Local means 114 miles from the ranch is the local pharmacy. Am I right about that?
No, we're only 10 miles out of town. I'm very blessed it's that perfect amount where we're in the country, but it's not long for me to just jaunt into town when I need stuff. So, no, we have a pretty cool small town, but it's only 2,000. So I am in a very, very small rural area. But I'm going to tie this back to food because for me, to some people, they view this very, very different. Like pharmaceuticals is very different from food. But what I think, in my opinion, of how I saw this happen is the same to me. And it's something that Tara and I mentioned on the podcast a lot. It's like we got to the place where we are for a reason, right? Whether that's in the food landscape or the pharmaceutical landscape. And for me, it comes down to marketing. Like what they're talking about is all of these ads running on TV, wherever, now on YouTube, wherever they're running these pharmaceutical ads. They all started the same with food marketing, the same way. We as consumers were disconnected from what was happening to our body and what we're putting into body, whether that was the food we were ingesting and how that started, or the medicine we were being asked to take and we having no idea where that came from or the side effects of it or what our options were with it. So the brilliant response to that was the marketing, right? Whether that's food or pharmaceuticals. We're going to run more ads. We're going to let the consumers know, the patients know what their options are, what the problems with those medicine are, and we're going to take it straight to them. And we're going to let them know the marketing around the medicine. Same thing with food. We're going to put all these labels on there, and we're going to take the disconnect between the farmer at the beginning and the shopper at the end, and we're going to give them this piece of information in the middle to solve the problem, the information gap. And we went too far. So it's dialing back. Do I absolutely think that there's a problem with the pharmaceutical industry and the amount of money whether they're running the TV ads or, pharmaceutical reps in the doctor's offices? I mean, it's a whole conversation about the money spent on marketing with medicine. But do I think taking that away is an answer? And again, it's the same thing. It's food. That's why we care so much about it, because you're putting medicine in your body and your food on your body. And that's the most important thing to you, is your own body and your family's body. And so do I think taking away information is the answer either? No, it's like finding a new path forward of what a new answer is to solve some of these problems we unintentionally created when we were trying to, have good faith in solving them to begin with.
Tar, by the way.
Yeah, what she said.
All right, let's go here. Do you have optimism that we will be healthier when your kids are your age than right now? There's a side of me that says this is pro-ag. That's the thing. It's not pro-ag from the caloric consumption, meaning right now we are completely overconsumed. Caloric consumption's up like 40% in 60 years. And the number's pretty astonishing how much more we eat. Well, people are bigger. Well, maybe they shouldn't be, right? When you look at a high school graduating class and the average weight is, ungodly, 200 pounds for boys or something, and it used to be 150 or something. We don't need to be eating this many calories. That's not good for ag because we're in the business of making calories. But if it's better calories, if it's less processed, if it's not, less refined sugars, et cetera, no offense to the sugar people, but or even corn syrup. I mean, there's a reality that we're going to sell less calories. We think we should sell less calories per American, but there's pro-ag in that maybe it's better calories. Traceability, we're talking about nutrient density now. I've covered that on this show. I have optimism, and I have optimism that is actually positive for agriculture. But I see a lot of forces that work against this. Big pharma that likes sick customers. Politicians that cave and crater to whatever it is, whether it's a school lunch program, sugar policy, whatnot. I see human laziness, or to Natalie's point. Okay, fine, but don't take away my don't take away my Nutter bars. I've got optimism. Do you have optimism? Do we get healthier? Are your kids going to see a healthier America than you are?
So I don't know, maybe I'm naive, but I am optimistic, hopeful, I think even. And I think it goes back to something Natalie said actually like briefly at the beginning. And it kind of goes back actually to RFK's speech when he was, I don't know what the word is, like resigning from his candidacy or whatever the technical term is, when he stopped running for president and he gave his speech. And Natalie and I covered it on the podcast that we were like, how crazy is it that someone that was running for the presidency was dedicated this much time to talking about food and ag and health. We had never seen that before. And then in the months that followed, we saw Trump, who at the time was still running. And then when he gave his announcement speech or election speech, again, don't know the technical terms, dedicated time to talking about food and agriculture. And then now how front and center food and ag are again. Like, I guess I'm just hopeful that this is like momentum and it's movement that we need to end up in a better spot. And so I do think that I'm hopeful that our children will be healthier, because I do think there is necessary conversation that we are having, whether we all agree about how we're going about it or not. At least it's happening, I think, is where I'm hopeful.
Natalie, you can make the argument we've got more diabetes, we've got more obesity, we've got greater healthcare costs. We have we do have problems, and we in agriculture generally always just are still caught up in feed the world, make as many calories as you can, all that kind of thing. It's not because we've done anything intrinsically wrong in the fields and farms and ranches in America, but we also have never viewed ourselves as part of the solution. are we going to be viewed as part of the solution? I know you said it's not necessarily bad if we. What's wrong if there's less demand for Kellogg's, or if there's less demand for some of the processing of highly processed foods, ultra processed, I guess, which is the new term. Is ag going to be better off with a healthier America if we get a healthier America?
Yeah, I think so. I think, and that's one of the hard parts. When I was thinking about Tara, the question you just asked Tara, I think that I agree. I am hopeful as well. But the caveat I had to that, the dot, was I think it's going to be a challenge for every industry because it's going to require change and giving a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think the future of what agriculture looks like to have this, maybe food system and health numbers that we're all after is maybe, as you alluded to, going to change agriculture a little bit at its core. It's not going to get rid of agriculture, but I do think there will be sectors and people and families and parts of it will struggle making that change of what maybe the new agriculture looks like in order to feed into a healthier food system and a healthier nation. And I think that will be a struggle. I think it's hard to change things that for generational operations that the way they've done it before, it's hard to change our mindset about different things. It's hard to have, maybe knock our ego down a little bit and to be told that maybe the way we are doing things isn't the best way to move forward. And so I think some of those changes will be hard, but I think changes will be needed. And I think in the end result will be good because at the end of it, farmers grow really great food. And if we can get that connected to the consumers where they understand that and it connects to the health better, I think that's an absolute win for farming and agriculture.
Can I add something here that I think Damian, you will probably agree with me on, but it goes to something in the dairy side of things that I've been seeing in our marketing efforts through dairy. And it's something I keep thinking about. I am seeing in dairy this push part of it, and there's lots of components to it, but there is a push definitely for how do we get more cheese on the pizza? How do we get more, whatever? And I keep in the back of my mind thinking about this Maha movement and thinking, is that the push we want to be making right now? Is that where we want to be putting our eggs in that basket? And I do think there will always be the people who will want to order a pizza and want it to be extra cheesy. But at the same time, I'm to Natalie's point, how do we as industries weather this storm or make these changes? And for me, going forward, it's probably not going to be adding more, heavily ultra processed cheeses to cheese pizza. It's probably going to be positioning ourselves as the old fashioned whole milk that you have with breakfast, right? And so I do think there's gonna be a mindset shift that we have to make to keep up with these new demands and this new food landscape.
I absolutely 1,000,000% agree with you that our thinking has been particularly.
Someone put that in writing. Someone captured that in a video. Damian supports us and he agrees with us. Just want that.
Well,
noted.
We've been so focused on production, then it became let's now figure out a way to sell what we produce.
Yes.
We're all for more high fructose corn syrup because by God, we want to. What do we do in America? We grow corn, and I'm saying I'm from an I state, corn. Let's figure out a way. In Natalie's business, no one ever asked the consumer for a 1,700-pound hoof weight or a 1,200-pound carcass or a steak that is this big. We did that because it was good for the processors. The consumer never wanted a steak that's you need to have a kitchen table to put it on. The consumer doesn't ask for a lot of these things. And the good thing is, if we're talking about nutrient density and we're talking about flavor, look in your space, Tara, what are we seeing that's kind of a cool thing? The proliferation of high-end butter. So it still uses dairy. In fact, it uses more dairy because it's got a greater cream content, et cetera, et cetera. These things are where the consumer might be going and it doesn't make anyone less healthy. That's the other one is that, we're learning, eating a steak is not the reason you're unhealthy, right? Eating 16,000 calories a day, much of it processed food, is why you're unhealthy. So I think there is real optimism. But I'm not as optimistic in our ability to change quickly in production agriculture because we like to do what we do.
Yeah, and I think that's an important part of it too, not just for producers, to be aware of the timeline, because I don't think this needs to be rushed. Tara was actually just saying that on the podcast the other day, that we don't need to rush into some of these changes. If we're going to make this big of an overhaul to the food landscape and to our nation's health, it should be diligent, it should be slow. But I think that's lost on the consumer a little bit. So I would love to see that portion also relate to the consumer, that changes are being made. It will just maybe not on the timeline you envision them to be made when it comes to agriculture.
The good thing is the consumer doesn't need us to make the changes. They are the voice, and that's the thing that you don't want to be mean, but you want to be healthier? Well, eat healthier, and then healthy food costs more money. Well, not necessarily, and also what doesn't cost? Eat less, and that's something that America could do. But consumers are in charge ultimately. All right, Tara. Everybody thinks that somehow we're going to be disagreeing about stuff. We didn't disagree on anything. I held up a Coke can and said you were my friend after all.
I know. I want to point that out. I don't know if you remember an hour ago who screwed up the time for this meeting, but it was not me. So I don't know if Tara is truly your friend or if I am the friend in this conversation. And you're losing sight.
And here you are coming to us from a hotel room, still getting your work done in a different time zone. I mean, let's face it, it's not your fault. You're right. It's Tara's.
She's doing the most. Yeah, it's my fault.
So their names are Tara Vander Dussen, and she's a New Mexico dairy producer with her husband. And then we got Natalie Kovarik, who is a Nebraska beef producer and part-time pharmacist at the pharmacy in the town that's 10 miles away. And if you want to find them, where do they find you?
Yeah, you can find us. If you're listening to this, you're probably a podcast person, so we'd love to have you over at Discover Ag. You can find us across all major platforms as well as YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can also find us at Discover Ag Podcast.
And I don't know if I'm subscribed, but I will be as soon as I click the button to end this thing. That's Tara and that's Natalie. They've been a guest on this show before. They probably will be again. I hope they are. If you are listening to this, do indeed hit my subscribe button on my YouTube channel. Finally putting some muscle in behind that the last several months. I need to grow my followers there. Also, obviously, if you were planning a meeting in 2025, you get 3 options here for speakers that could make it to your meeting and put on a hell of a program. Remember my sponsors, also my friends over at Redox. Go to redoxgrows.com. Harvest Returns. Go to harvestreturns.com, and also Newfields Ag. Thank you very much for being here. Also, check out my show, The Granary, which is being shot with my friends at Extreme Ag right here at my on-farm tavern. It's a great one. Also, you can find it at extremeag.farm or on YouTube also. Till next time, that's Tara, that's Natalie, I'm Damian Mason, and this is The Business of Agriculture. This episode of The Business of Agriculture was brought to you by my friends at Newfields Ag. American made, American known, focusing on the success of the American farmer. That's Newfields Ag, offering a complete lineup of high-performing biological products for you, the American farmer. Visit newfieldsag.com for more.